This is the story of a car breakdown that changed everything for my friend Jack. You'll probably think it's just another creepy tale, but trust me, when you hear it, you won't look at lonely country roads the same way again. So sit back and listen carefully. It all started one Friday evening in early December. Jack had been working late in the city, and by the time he finished, it was well past 9 p.m. He had planned to visit his parents over the weekend, and instead of taking the motorway, he decided to drive a quieter, more scenic route through the countryside. Jack was always up for a peaceful drive. He thought it would be nice to clear his head before spending the weekend with his family. Little did he know, it would be the last time he drove that road. Jack was driving his old Ford Focus, a reliable car that had been with him for years. It was a cold, crisp night, with the air fresh and the moon just starting to rise. The road was narrow, winding through dense forests and open fields, with only the occasional house dotted along the way. He had driven this road a few times before, but not in the dark. The absence of streetlights gave the road a spooky feel, but Jack wasn't too worried. He was used to it. At first, everything was fine. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the soft crunch of gravel under the tires. But about an hour into the drive, his car made a strange noise, a low grinding sound that made Jack frown. He glanced at the dashboard. The fuel gauge was fine, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He figured it was just a small issue, maybe something to do with the engine, and he decided to keep going. But then, as he rounded a sharp bend, the car suddenly jerked and the engine sputtered. The lights on the dashboard flashed for a moment, then went dark. The car stalled. Jack tried turning the key, but the engine refused to start. He was stuck in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees and fields, with no signal on his phone. Jack got out of the car, frustrated. He opened the bonnet and tried to check the engine, but everything seemed fine. He checked the headlights, the tires, even the oil level. Nothing was out of place. He got back in and tried the engine again. Nothing. It was dead. It was then that he heard something, a rustling sound coming from the woods behind him. At first, he thought it was just a fox or some other animal, but then the noise stopped. He turned around, scanning the trees with his headlights, but saw nothing. The darkness was thick and the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly into the woods. Jack shrugged it off, deciding it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. He sat there for a few more minutes, trying to figure out what to do. He thought about walking to the nearest house, but the road was deserted. There were no cars in sight, and it was getting colder by the minute. He looked at his phone again, but there was still no signal. His only option was to wait until morning, or hope someone drove by. Jack wasn't scared, but the isolation of the place was starting to feel oppressive. That's when he heard footsteps. At first it was faint, a soft crunching sound, like someone walking on gravel. Jack stiffened in his seat. He quickly turned off the headlights and looked out the side window, trying to see if anyone was approaching. The footsteps grew louder, but still, he couldn't see anyone. Then, just as quickly as they had started, the footsteps stopped. He waited, listening. The silence that followed felt even worse than the noise. Jack felt his heart rate pick up. Something wasn't right. His mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. He grabbed his phone again. Still no signal. The feeling of being watched settled over him like a heavy blanket. Then, through the silence, he heard a voice. A soft whisper, like someone was standing right next to his car, just beyond the reach of the headlights. "Help me." The voice was faint, distant, and almost pleading. Jack's blood ran cold. He couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. but the voice was so clear and so real that it sent a chill down his spine. He didn't know what to do. Should he get out of the car and check? Should he stay inside, locked up and safe? The logical part of his brain told him to ignore it, to stay put until morning. But the other part of him, something primal, urged him to get out and investigate. He cracked open the door slowly, just enough to peek out. The night air was icy against his skin. He listened for any further sounds, but there was only the quiet rustling of the trees. The voice had stopped. Jack looked around the area again, but there was no one in sight. No movement, no sign of anything that could explain what he had heard. But then, he saw it. Out of the corner of his eye, in the shadows of the trees, a figure was standing. At first it looked like just another shadow, but as he focused on it, he realized it was a person. A man, standing still, watching him. Jack's heart thudded in his chest. He quickly slammed the door shut and locked it, his mind racing. The man didn't move. He just stood there unmoving, staring at the car. Jack couldn't make out any details, just a dark shape, barely visible in the moonlight. After a few seconds, Jack did the only thing he could think of. He started the car. Again, it roared to life, the engine sputtering before settling into a steady hum. Jack quickly shifted into gear and sped down the road, eyes fixed ahead. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He glanced at the rearview mirror once, twice. The figure was still there, still watching. Jack didn't look back again. He didn't dare. He drove like that for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. The feeling of being followed was overwhelming. Every shadow, every rustle in the trees, made his heart skip a beat. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw the lights of a village in the distance. A few houses, a few shops. Civilization. He pulled into a gas station and stopped. His hands were shaking as he turned off the engine. He sat there for a long time, staring at the empty road behind him. His heart was still racing. He looked at his phone again. Still no signal. It was then that he saw it. On the rearview mirror, there was something smeared on the glass, a handprint. A large, smudged handprint, as if someone had pressed their hand against it from the outside. Jack didn't stick around. He called a tow truck and had his car taken to a nearby garage, but no one could explain what had happened. The car was fine. The engine wasn't damaged. There was no logical reason why it had stalled, but Jack knew something had happened that night. Something he couldn't explain. And he never drove down that road again. So if you ever find yourself on a lonely country road in the dead of night, and your car suddenly stalls with no explanation, just remember Jack's story. And whatever you do, don't open the door. This is the story of a disturbing car breakdown that happened to my friend Emily. I'm going to tell you exactly what she told me. I swear, by the end of it, you'll never want to drive alone at night again, especially not on an empty country road. It happened one cold October evening. Emily was driving back home to Manchester from a weekend trip in the Lake District. She had stayed longer than planned, so by the time she left, the sky was already getting dark. Her car was a silver Volkswagen Golf, not too old, not brand new either, but it had never given her any trouble before. She called me just before she left, said she'd be home around 10 p.m. if traffic was kind, but she never arrived that night. Instead, around 11:30 p.m., I got a call from her, but it wasn't what I expected. Before I tell you what she said, let me explain what led up to that moment. Emily was on the M6 for most of the journey, but about halfway through, her GPS suggested a quicker route, a quiet B road that would cut through some small villages and open fields. She said it would save her about 25 minutes. It sounded fine, so she took it. At first it was okay, peaceful even. The moon was out, lighting the road just enough to see the trees and fields around her. There were no other cars, and the only sound was the hum of her engine and the occasional bump from the uneven road. But after about 20 minutes, her car began to make a weird noise, a low grinding sound coming from under the bonnet. She turned the radio off and listened closely. The sound got worse with every mile. Then, without warning, the dashboard lights flickered, the power steering tightened up, and the engine shut off completely. She rolled to a slow stop near a curve in the road, right beside a field with an old wooden fence and a line of trees behind. When she tried to restart the car, nothing happened, not even a click. Emily wasn't the type to panic easily, but something about that place unsettled her. She said the air felt too still, not just quiet, dead quiet, like the world had pressed pause. She checked her phone. No signal. Typical for that kind of area, but not what you want when your car is dead in the middle of nowhere. She sat there for a few minutes hoping another car might pass by. None did. Then she noticed something strange. Across the road in the field behind the fence, she saw a man, just standing there, about 30 feet away, facing her, not moving, just watching. She didn't see him walk up. 1 second the field was empty, the next, he was there. At first she thought maybe he was a farmer or someone from a nearby house. She flashed her headlights a couple times, hoping he'd come over and help. He didn't. He stayed completely still. Emily got out of the car slowly, keeping her eyes on the man. She waved and called out, "Excuse me, my car's broken down." No answer, not even a twitch. That's when she felt the first twinge of fear. She told me it was like her body knew before her mind did, that something was wrong with this guy. He wasn't right. Still, she tried again, louder this time. "Hello, can you help me?" Again, nothing. She decided to get back in the car and lock the doors. But just as she turned around to open the door, she heard a strange sound behind her, like twigs snapping and leaves being crushed under heavy footsteps. She spun back around. The man was gone. Gone. She scanned the field with her flashlight app, heart pounding. Empty. Nothing but grass and trees. She jumped into the car, slammed the door and locked it. Her hands were shaking as she sat there trying to think. She didn't know what to do, stay in the car or start walking. Then her phone buzzed. 1 bar of signal. She called me and I picked up right away. Her voice was shaking. She said, "My car's dead. I'm on some back road past Layton. There was a man watching me. Now he's gone." I told her to stay in the car, keep the doors locked. I was already pulling on my shoes, ready to get in my car and drive to her. But then I heard her gasp. "Oh my God, he's right behind the car. He's just standing there." Then the line went dead. I kept calling her back. No answer. I called the police and gave them everything. Her name, where she might be, what had just happened. They promised to send someone right away. I drove toward where she had described. It took me about 40 minutes, but I finally found her car just off the road near a bend, just like she'd said. Here's the weird part. The car was empty. The doors were locked. Her phone was still inside, sitting on the passenger seat. The headlights were off, and the car looked like it had been abandoned. No sign of Emily. The police arrived a few minutes later and began searching the nearby fields and trees. They found nothing. Not a single footprint. Not a single clue. It was like she had vanished into thin air. But that's not where it ends. The next morning, just as the sun was rising, they found her. Emily was walking down a country lane about 2 miles away, barefoot, confused, and freezing cold. Her clothes were muddy, and she had scratches on her arms and face. She didn't remember how she got there. In fact, she didn't remember leaving the car at all. She was taken to the hospital and treated for mild hypothermia. When I visited her, she looked shaken. Not just scared, like something deep inside her had cracked. I asked her what happened, but she shook her head. "I don't want to talk about it," she whispered. "But he wasn't human," that's all she said. That and one other thing. When I looked into his face, she told me, there was nothing there. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin, like something pretending to be human, but failing to. This day, Emily doesn't drive alone at night. She never takes shortcuts. And if her GPS ever suggests a back road, she ignores it. I don't blame her, because now I don't either. So if you ever find yourself driving through the countryside late at night and your car suddenly dies near a quiet field, don't get out. Don't call for help. And if you see someone just standing there, staring without moving, pray your phone has signal. This is the story of a disturbing car breakdown I'm going to tell you. It still gives me chills every time I think about it. It happened 2 years ago, but I remember every second like it just happened yesterday. I wasn't even supposed to be on that road. That's what haunts me the most. I was coming back from a small family gathering in a quiet town about 4 hours from my place. It was late, maybe close to midnight, when I left. I didn't want to stay the night because I had work early the next morning. Everyone told me to wait until morning, but I just wanted to get home and sleep in my own bed. I regret that choice now. The GPS said there was a faster back road that would cut about 40 minutes off my drive. I didn't think much of it. I mean, I'd taken back roads before. So, I followed the directions, turned off the highway, and entered a narrow road surrounded by trees on both sides. There were no street lights, no houses, just forest and the sound of tires on gravel. At first, it was peaceful. The night was cool, my windows were rolled down slightly, and the radio was playing soft music. But about 20 minutes in, the road got worse. Potholes, branches, and sharp turns made it harder to drive. I slowed down, thinking maybe this shortcut wasn't worth it after all. That's when my car started acting up. The headlights flickered for a second. Just a second. Then the engine made a weird grinding noise, and the dashboard lights blinked, like they were short-circuiting. I muttered to myself, trying to stay calm. "Come on, not here," I whispered. And then, just like that, the engine died. My car rolled to a stop in the middle of nowhere, completely dead. I tried restarting it, but nothing happened. The key turned, but the engine wouldn't even click. I checked my phone. No signal. Not even one bar. I was alone, stuck on a forest road with a dead car and no way to call for help. I told myself it was fine. I had a flashlight in the glove box and a few snacks in the back seat. Maybe the engine just overheated. I decided to wait for a while and try again later. So I sat there, the forest around me completely silent. Too silent. No insects, no wind, just stillness. After about 15 minutes, I thought I heard something. A soft crunch, like footsteps on leaves. I turned off the radio and listened carefully. Nothing, just silence again. I laughed nervously to myself, thinking it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again. Closer this time. Crunch. Crunch. Slow and steady, like someone walking toward my car. I held my breath and turned on the flashlight. I aimed it out the window, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. The sound stopped. I was frozen, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was an animal. A deer, maybe, or some raccoon. I tried to calm down, locked the doors, and leaned back in the seat. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a knock. 3 slow knocks on the back window. I jumped, so hard I nearly screamed. My heart pounded in my chest as I twisted around to look, but there was no one there. The flashlight in my hand shook as I pointed it at the rear window. Nothing, just the dark forest behind me. I tried to talk myself out of the fear. Maybe a branch fell, maybe something hit the glass by accident, but it didn't feel like an accident. The knocks were too slow, too intentional. That's when I decided I wasn't waiting anymore. I got out of the car. I popped the hood to check the engine. Maybe I could see something obvious like a loose cable. I didn't really know much about cars, but it felt better than sitting there doing nothing. I shined my flashlight into the engine, leaned in, and then I heard breathing. Not mine. Not close, but not far either. A soft, raspy breathing coming from the trees. I stood up quickly and turned the flashlight toward the sound. Again, nothing. But this time the air felt heavier, like something was watching me. I couldn't explain it. It was just a feeling, but it was strong, like a pressure in my chest. I slammed the hood shut and jumped back into the car, locking the doors again. I sat there, not moving, barely breathing. That's when the scratching started. Light scratching on the passenger side window. It wasn't a branch. It was too controlled, like fingers dragging across the glass. I turned the flashlight that way, and again no one was there, just the noise. I couldn't take it anymore. I reached under the seat and grabbed the small emergency hammer I kept there. My plan was stupid, but it was the only one I had. I'd run down the road and not stop until I found help or signal or something. Anything. I opened the door, slowly, flashlight in one hand, hammer in the other. I stepped out and heard something run. Yes, run into the woods, fast and low to the ground. I didn't see it clearly, just movement. It wasn't animal-like. It was too quiet, too smooth. I didn't wait to think. I bolted down the road, flashlight bouncing with every step. My lungs were burning, my legs hurt. But I didn't stop. Every now and then, I thought I heard something behind me. Like someone, running just a few steps behind, then stopping when I turned my head. After what felt like forever, I saw lights, actual headlights in the distance. A truck coming down the road. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms, yelling like a madman. The truck stopped, and the driver, a middle-aged man, looked at me like I was insane. I told him what happened. He listened, nodded, and, "Let me climb in." He told me this road was known for strange things. He didn't come this way often, but he'd heard stories. People disappearing, cars breaking down and later found completely burned out. Weird noises. He didn't go into detail. Maybe he didn't want to scare me more than I already was. We drove back to my car, and it was just sitting there like nothing had happened. But there were 3 long scratches on the passenger side window. Deep, straight scratches that hadn't been there before. The truck driver didn't say anything about them. He just looked at them, then at me and said, "You're lucky, kid." He towed my car to the nearest town and I called a mechanic the next morning. They said the car had no real issues. The battery was fine, the engine worked, it started without a problem, it was like nothing had happened. But I know something did. I felt it. I heard it. I saw the scratches. Since that night, I don't take shortcuts. I don't drive late if I can avoid it, and I never ever take that road again. So if your GPS ever tells you to save some time by taking an unknown back road through the forest, just don't. You might not be as lucky as I was. This is the story of something that happened to my friend Sarah a couple of years ago. She still doesn't like talking about it, but every time I see her, I can tell it's still in her mind, haunting her. And after you hear what happened, you'll understand why. So let me tell you. It all started on a weekend in early spring. Sarah had been working hard for weeks, and she decided to take a break. She wanted to get away from the city and head out to a small, quiet village in the countryside. For some peace and quiet, she rented a little cottage near a place called Ashford Hollow. It was a remote area surrounded by forests and hills, and perfect for someone who just wanted to relax. There was no cell signal, no Wi-Fi, just nature and solitude. She packed her things and drove out there on a Saturday morning. The drive was long but beautiful, with the sun shining and the countryside rolling by like something out of a postcard. Sarah was excited. She'd been craving some time alone, away from the bustle of the city. As she got closer to the village, the roads grew narrower, the trees taller, and the houses more spaced out. It felt peaceful, almost like she was entering another world. She arrived around lunchtime, and the cottage was just as charming as it had been described. It was small, made of stone with ivy climbing up the sides and surrounded by a tall stone wall. There was a little garden out front, with flowers in bloom. Inside, it was cozy and smelled like wood and fresh air. The perfect escape. After unpacking, Sarah decided to go for a walk. There was a trail behind the cottage that led into the forest, and she was curious to see where it went. The path was well worn, and it wasn't too long before she found herself deep in the woods, surrounded by the sounds of birds and the rustling of leaves. It was peaceful, calm, but there was something else there too, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The further she walked, the more she noticed how quiet it was. No animals, no distant sounds of cars or people. Just an eerie silence that seemed to press in on her from all sides. She shook it off, telling herself it was just the isolation. After all, the village was small and she was surrounded by nature. Then something caught her eye. At the edge of the path hidden among the trees, she saw an old wooden sign. It was barely visible, half hidden by ivy and moss. She walked closer to see what it said. The faded letters read, "Ashford Hollow Cemetery." A chill ran down her spine. She hadn't seen any mention of a cemetery when she'd looked up the village, and she was sure the locals hadn't mentioned it either. Curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to take a detour. She followed the narrow, overgrown trail through the trees, trying to ignore the feeling of unease that was creeping up on her. The further she walked, the more the air seemed to grow heavy. It was as though the forest was closing in around her, the trees leaning in too close, their branches twisted and gnarled. Finally, she reached the cemetery. It wasn't much, a small forgotten graveyard, with only a few headstones scattered among the trees. Some of the graves looked ancient, their stones weathered and cracked by time. There was no fence, no caretaker, just a collection of graves that seemed to have been left behind, forgotten by everyone. Sarah felt a strange pull to the place, as if something was drawing her in. She wandered among the graves, reading the names and dates on the stones, her footsteps soft on the moss-covered ground. Some of the names were old, going back centuries. But then, near the back of the cemetery, she noticed something that made her pause. There was a grave with a fresh-looking headstone, still free of moss and dirt. The name on the stone was Lillian Hughes, with a date of birth and death that only seemed to be a few months old. It was odd. There had been no mention of a recent burial in the village, no announcement, nothing. She stood there for a moment, staring at the stone, feeling an unsettling presence in the air. That's when she heard the sound. A low, soft whisper coming from the other side of the graveyard. Sarah turned around, heart racing, but she saw nothing. The wind rustled the leaves, but there were no people, no animals, just the trees. She told herself it was just her imagination. Maybe the wind had carried a sound, or maybe she was tired from the long drive. But then she heard it again. A whisper, faint but clear. Lillian. Sarah's blood ran cold. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She looked around again, this time more carefully. The cemetery was empty, except for her and the graves. There was no one nearby. The whisper was coming from the same direction as before, but there was no one there. Suddenly, she felt an intense urge to leave. She turned quickly and started walking back down the path, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. Every step felt heavier, and the forest seemed darker, even though the sun was still shining. Her breath came faster as she picked up the pace. As she reached the edge of the woods and stepped back onto the main path, she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone there, but there was no one. Just the quiet woods and the long, winding trail ahead. She stopped for a moment to catch her breath, trying to calm herself down. She needed to shake off the fear, but something was telling her not to go back to the cottage. Not yet. As the sun began to set, Sarah made her way back to the cottage. She didn't want to, but the thought of staying out there in the woods any longer felt wrong. The shadows were stretching longer, and the atmosphere had shifted from peaceful to something darker. She hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. That night she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, haunted by the memory of the grave and the whisper. It felt like someone was watching her. She kept hearing the whisper in her mind. Lillian. The name echoed over and over in her head. At about 3 a.m., she heard a soft knock on the door. She froze. It was quiet. Too quiet. No one came out. Here at this hour, no one should be at her door. She stood up, heart hammering in her chest. She tiptoed to the window and looked out. There was no one in sight, just the darkness of the garden and the empty road. No sign of life. The knock came again, louder this time. Terror washed over her. She grabbed her phone, ready to call the police, but there was no signal. The door handle jiggled, as if someone was trying to get in. But then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and sleeplessness. When morning finally came, Sarah left the cottage early, her mind racing with questions. She drove back to the village, determined to find out more about the cemetery and the grave she'd seen. When she stopped at the local shop, she asked the owner about the cemetery and the grave of Lillian Hughes. The woman's face turned pale. She hesitated, then told Sarah that Lillian Hughes had died just a few months ago. But what really made Sarah's blood run cold was when the woman added, Lillian's grave was never supposed to be there. It was dug in the wrong spot, and no one knows how or why it ended up there. Sarah never returned to Ashford Hollow, and every time I see her, I can tell that the memory of that night still haunts her. If you ever find yourself driving through a small village in the countryside and see a cemetery that doesn't quite feel right, trust your instincts. Stay away.